Minister Guajajara, thank you so much for joining us. Your country is hosting COP30 this year, and for the very first time, Indigenous peoples will have a seat at the table. Why didn't this happen before, and what are your expectations from the summit?
I believe everything is a process, and we've been building up this Indigenous participation over the past 15 years of COP. Since I started participating in 2009, we've been working to increase the representation. Now we're expecting at least 3,000 Indigenous people in Belém and 1,000 accredited for the Blue Zone. So we have good expectations regarding the outcome of what we've been building as Indigenous peoples. We fought to have the largest Indigenous representation ever at COP, in both quantity and quality. We carried out a training process for Indigenous leaders who are already participating in events. They were at the COP in Banku and the biodiversity COP in Cali, as an exercise in engaging directly with diplomatic negotiators. So we will also have direct participation in the negotiation rooms. I am chairing the Circles of Peoples, where we have 2 international commissions, one for Indigenous peoples and another for Afro-descendants, local communities, and family farming. Besides that, we carried out a preparation and an organizational process in Brazil for the Indigenous representation in Belém through the COP Parent Style, a way to involve Indigenous people with COP. We really hope that a concrete result from this will be a greater understanding by global leaders of the inclusion of forests and indigenous territories as one of the most effective measures to mitigate climate crisis. Another expected outcome is a financial mechanism that guarantees a direct percentage of funding for indigenous peoples.
What are the urgent challenges for indigenous peoples around the world?
I think we're living in a situation that is very widespread, and it's about the exploitation of indigenous territories. In Brazil, we face illegal mining, in indigenous lands, illegal logging, land logging, contamination of rivers with mercury from mining. All of this directly affects the lives of indigenous peoples, destroys the environment, and also contaminates rivers, bringing disease not just to indigenous communities, but to all people who use the water or consume fish contaminated with mercury from those rivers. So we have this challenge of invasions for the illegal exploitation of natural resources in indigenous territories. But we also face another issue that I think is very widespread: racism. There is a deep-rooted racism in society that ends up doubting our ability to manage. Today, we hold strategic positions in the federal government, but the structures are not prepared to receive indigenous peoples. They lack flexibility to allow us to bring the changes we need to build effective public policies. So I think we're on the right path. We're arriving, building, advancing, but there is still a long road ahead.
Brazil has just under 2 million indigenous peoples. What are their strengths and what do they lack?
Nós temos uma diversidade cultural gigante no Brasil.
Yes, we have a huge cultural diversity in Brazil. We are 305 peoples who speak 274 different languages, and today we have more than 60,000 indigenous peoples in universities pursuing higher education. We are now building the first indigenous university. President Lula is very hopeful that we can announce this university later this year. I think that if we strengthen education, we also strengthen the preparation for inclusion. But we want a university that also embraces the richness of who we are, because we don't want to be victims of the system anymore or seen as pitiful. We want to be valued for the power we hold in protecting the environment, in safeguarding biodiversity, and that this recognition translates into financial support so we can continue protecting and caring for it in our own way of life.
Countries with a lot of biodiversity often struggle with a balance of being productive while also protecting the environment and indigenous peoples. Has Brazil in the past stopped or said no to a project that would help Brazil, but rather protect indigenous people and the environment instead?
Eu acho que tudo
I think everything comes down to balance. It's a matter of balance. I believe you can ensure food production, for example, by changing food systems and moving toward more diversified production with a variety of foods. Because first of all, we need to think about what we eat, what really nourishes us. And today, you see a lot of monoculture, large areas of monoculture grown only for commodities and export, which don't actually feed people. So if we think globally, as President Lula says, that today the only war that should be fought is the war against hunger, poverty, and the climate crisis, then we also need to rethink our food systems so we can really combat hunger in the world. And that, done with awareness, is totally possible.
É totalmente possível.
What are the outcomes proposed by Brazil at the UN recently at the Tropical Forest Forever facility?
It's a mechanism led by Brazil. We worked on the creation of this mechanism over 2 years, and now, during a side event at the UN General Assembly, we're seeing global leaders beginning to commit resources to it. The difference, in my view, is the guarantee that 20% of the funds will go directly to indigenous peoples and local communities. This will ensure that those who protect the forests have the means and infrastructure to continue doing so. We're already in an almost irreversible climate crisis. If we don't redirect investments to those who are actually doing the daily work of keeping the forest standing and biodiversity alive, we may not reach the necessary goals to avoid the point of no return for tropical forests. So the Tropical Forest Forever Fund is an innovative mechanism, a catalyst for resources that will structure a concrete action agenda for what really matters in fighting the climate crisis.
Realmente interessa para enfrentar a crise climática.
I'd like to get your thoughts on China's new global governance initiative and also the importance of multilateralism at this time.
A gente tem percebido.
We notice that a lack of multilateralism weakens collective decisions and leaves room for war, genocide, and impositions. President Lula has spoken a lot about the need to strengthen multilateralism in order to guarantee democracy worldwide. This way, we can also prevent the rise of extremism around the world. Today, Brazil brings to the global stage these themes: strengthening multilateralism, democracy, and national sovereignty. I think that's essential today, to ensure autonomy, independence, and that each nation can decide for itself how to manage its wealth.
Por quem realmente é o dono.
Minister Guajajara, thank you so much for joining us.
Obrigada.